last night we heard the news that the Iranian, well, someone struck two ships near the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians, of course, don't take responsibility. They just, we just hear two ships. I can imagine it may have been from Iran. I doubt it was the Kuwaitis or the Saudis, but in any case, so Iran, struck two ships. I think it has a lot to do with this show of force, because the Iranians during the last 2-3 days, I've been told that they did not want uh, tensions in the Persian Gulf because of the ceremony, because of all the people on the streets. But I think the show of force was so enormous that they decided last night to strike two tankers that refused to obey the Iranian military. Because, as you know, according to the MOU between the United States and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz during the period of the MOU's enforcement is under the authority of Iran. And the Americans, they opened up their own corridor in violation of the MOU. I mean, they're violating everything about the MOU that they can. So the Iranians threatened these ships to go back, and they ignored Iran. So two ships were struck last night. And I think that this is not unrelated to the immense show of force that we saw and we continue to see today in Qom. So even though they wanted no tensions during this period, but I think that the power was so, the show of force was so effective that they said, no, we're going to enforce the regulations in the Persian Gulf. Now, one other thing that I wanted to say was that when before, and I was saying this to friends, maybe I said this to you as well. Before the funeral, I was wondering how I knew it would be a huge turnout. I was absolutely certain about that, but I was wondering if it would be, how big it was, because it's been over 4 months since Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred, and so those raw emotions that people felt during the first few days and first few weeks, we're no longer like that anymore. So we have a new leader. The war has played itself out up to a point, at least until where we are, until we've reached this point. It's been over 4 months. But you would have thought, if you were in the crowd yesterday, that he had just been murdered he had been martyred the day before. That's how people felt. So it's over 4 months, but you'd think it's like right after, if you didn't know, you just were dropped into this crowd, you'd think he'd just been martyred. So I think this is going to have a huge impact on Iran's foreign policy in the weeks and months and years ahead. It's going to give them more power, more authority. The negotiators are going to feel more empowered with all this I mean, on the streets, Nima, people would, like those who recognize me, they'd come up to me and say, don't come, like, as if I'm a negotiator, which I'm not. But for some reason, many people seem to think I'm involved. And the more I deny it, the more they think, oh, so he must really be involved. But people would come up to me and say, we have to be tougher. We want revenge, and they want revenge. People from from Trump, Netanyahu, the leadership in the United States, and the leadership in the Israeli regime, of course. So the anger among Iranians is huge. The demands for revenge are enormous. But in any case, I think that's going to make the negotiators much tougher at the negotiating table. I think it's going to make the Iranian armed forces deal with greater assertiveness towards the United States, the Supreme National Security Council, the state. This is going to have a huge impact. And I think outside, beyond Iran's borders, it's going to have an enormous impact, because countries recognize that Iran won a war. They won the siege warfare. They won at the negotiating table, and in fact, many Iranians are in the funeral were saying this deal is not good enough. A lot of them were critical of the deal, but in any case, in the West, they're saying this was this deal. In anyone who read the text, it was a victory for Iran. But criticisms aside, some of them are quite valid. But in any case, this is what we have. But so you put all those together, those victories, this string of victories, and then add this funeral that's ongoing, and it's just victory after victory after victory for Iran. And it's going to enhance Iran's stature and position across the globe. And finally, this is terrible news for Trump, and this is terrible news for the Israeli regime. And it gives Iran and its allies a new energy to support the Palestinian people. And by the way, a Palestinian friend of mine was telling me today, he said it's a good thing that I remind people about Gaza on different shows. So since he told me that, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have to always keep Gaza in our minds, think about Gaza and remind people about Gaza, and keep the issue of Palestine and especially Gaza in front of the eyes of the world to increase pressure on the enemies of the Palestinian people.
Professor Marandi, the country Iran I know, since the revolution, it was always this sort of mindset in the mind of decision makers in Iran that the United States is going to attack sooner or later. They're going to attack Iran. It was always the case because of the identity of the revolution. It was anti-imperialism. It was against the U.S. leverage, U.S. pressure in the region, dominance in the region. They didn't want that. And so that was always the case, that the war gonna come. But the way that the United States started this war was so much shocking, because many people never thought that they're gonna start with the assassination of the supreme leader, with the assassination of those kids in the primary school in Minab. These were huge shocks for the Iranian people. And this is the way it is today, because their understanding, as I understand it, it was that it's going to be all on the battlefield. It's going to be the two armies coming together and fighting each other, not assassination, not the way that Israel fights its wars. This was, I think that was a moving sort of shock for Iranian people.
Yes, I mean, even and on a sort of, I digress, but even I don't follow football that much, if at all. But even this whole incident or this whole affair where Trump forced FIFA to allow a U.S. player who was banned from the game with Belgium, forcing them to allow him to play, that is very symbolic of U.S. behavior in general. Trump is more crude than previous U.S. presidents, but the United States sees itself as above the law, with special privileges. It can do whatever it wants, and because they see themselves as exceptional, and this is true across the West when it comes to the United States. They think that they have the moral authority to slaughter kids, to destroy the lives of millions of people, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya or anywhere. This is the United States, and so this is how they treat the rest of the world. And so Iranians always felt that, or at least the elites in Iran felt that there was ultimately going to be war. Now, not everyone believed that. I think the liberal faction in the Iranian political elite thought that they could have some sort of deal with the United States, and if we dealt with them differently, that they would leave us alone. And that obviously was naive, and it didn't work. And actually, many of them, their views have evolved. A couple of weeks ago, I think I said somewhere else that this was on Iranian television. I saw it online, so I'm not sure if it was from an Iranian TV channel or it was one of those Iranian online programs. But one of the reformist, the head of one of the reformist political parties in Iran, was on the show, and he said that Ayatollah Khamenei was right about building these underground missile bases and developing Iran's missile technology and drone technology. And if we were in control of the armed forces, Iran would have collapsed by now. He was saying that. He was saying we were wrong. And you remember as well as I, in Iran, there was a lot of criticism directed towards Ayatollah Khamenei over the last couple of decades about Iran's drone program. They were the West was making fun of Iran's drones. Back then, Iran, I think the only country that was really well, I'm not sure if it was the only country, but it was the only country that I recall that was really pursuing drones was Iran, and they were making fun of Iran's drones until, of course, the Ukraine war began and the Russians began using Iranian drones, and they were making fun of Iran's missile program, criticizing, and so many people in Iran, politicians, people in government, even in different administrations, were criticizing the money spent for the underground bases, the drone program, the missile program, and basically criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei for that. Even though Iran's military expenditure is lower than other countries in the region, but instead of buying, far lower, and instead of purchasing lots of jets from foreign countries and things like that, expensive planes, they went and developed a military strategy which was less expensive, more indigenous. They invested in technology, and ultimately it worked because the Iranians knew that if, let's say, they bought 200 jets or 150, 250, I don't know, 150 jets or whatever, very expensive, that the Americans would have still outgunned them, and they couldn't have won the war that way. So they really thought about can we fight a war with Americans and win? And this is a strategy that's been pursued more or less for decades. And after the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, it intensified. So people now are seeing that Ayatollah Khamenei's military strategy, because it's his strategy, he was the one who presided over it for the last few decades, was brilliant. And even though he was martyred, and so many of the commanders in last year's war and this year's war were murdered, the country won the war. And it wasn't just about survival. I mean, many people were saying during the war, well, if Iran just survives that. During the first week, people thought Iran would collapse outside of Iran. Many of us here didn't think that way. I was confident Iran would win. Many others were confident too. Perhaps not to the degree that it actually did win, but we were confident. But many people thought Iran would be defeated. Then gradually, after a week or so, when they saw that Iran wasn't going to fold, they said, well, if Iran just survives, that's a win. But Iran did far more than just survive. Till the last moment, they were hammering U.S. bases, Israeli regime assets, and those regimes that were assisting the United States in the war in the region. So he was vindicated, despite all the critiques in Iran by liberals mostly, and as I said, many of them now accept this. So what the United States has done is that it has helped demolish the worldview of many liberals in Iran who thought that we could, if we behaved differently towards the United States, that the United States would behave in a more reasonable manner towards Iran. People don't think that way anymore.